Hello and welcome back to Rock Cycle. I hope you're having a good day. Now crikey, it's been quite a while since I made a video, so thank you to anyone that's stuck around. I broke my laptop a few months ago and since then I haven't really got back into the habit of making videos regularly and I've been a bit lazy to be honest, so thanks to anyone who's been sticking around. But I thought, you know what, I'll come back today because it'd be nice to do a bit of a happy video, I guess. We're going to be looking back at some of the good things that happened in 2020 because there's been an awful lot of shit. And namely those good things are music, because while this year has been pretty crappy for quite a lot of reasons, I think musically we've had a really good year. So I'm going to be going back and looking at my 10 favourite albums that came out this year. Now to be fair, there were quite a lot of good albums that came out this year and these are my personal top 10, so of course this is entirely subjective, it's not called objective, it's all based on my personal opinion, so feel free to disagree with me. Just maybe you thought it was interesting, because I'll be certainly interested to look at some of your comments. Let me know if you think there's any I missed or you agree with me. Let me know what your favourite albums of the year were, because there definitely were quite a lot of good ones. So I think, well, we're going to go into it now. I guess this sort of the usual requirements for what makes this list. There's not going to be any compilation or best of albums, that sort of thing. And we're not going to be looking at any reissues or re-releases of albums such as like, well, the Hybrid Theory 20th anniversary edition came out this year and that would probably make my #1 album. So I'll just give a couple of honourable mentions first. We've got Dreamland by Glass Animals, Folklore by Tay Tay, Women in Music, Free by Hayman, Moral Panic by Nothing But Thieves, who I guess have been having a bit of their own moral panic this year to say the least. So first up at number 10 is Open Up Your Head by Seagulls. Now to be fair, I was a bit cynical at first when this album came out because I think most of the best songs had already been released on the singles or on EPs before, so I was a bit disappointed by the rest of the music. But to be fair, it has really grown on me as I've been listening to it since. It's very straightforward, indie fun, it's instantly catchy, it's got that really good bouncy energy that you want and it immediately feels familiar, whether that's a good thing or whether that's a bad thing. Like, this album doesn't do much new, it's not that original or unique, it's just basically a very solid British indie album done perfectly. If you like British indie, it's very good, it does that job perfectly. Number 9 is one of the most polarising albums that came out this year, and that is Notes on a Conditional Form by the 1975. Personally, when I did my original review, I gave it 3 stars. I came sort of down the middle on it, and to be fair, I do stand by most of the things I said in that review, so maybe I probably shouldn't be including a 3-star album on this list, but I think the good parts of it were so good it earned a spot on this list, because it did go on a bit too much. I can't remember how many tracks the total thing was, but when you cut out all of those instrumentals that went out on far too long, when you cut out all the vanity and the self-indulgence, the core of the album was really good. It was instant pop rock classics with that contagious, cheeky energy and charisma that only the 1975 can really manage, and Matt Healy delivering it in his own unique way, very tongue-in-cheek, and it just sort of oozes charisma. It just instantly builds you in, it pulls you in, and you want to listen to it, and it is very enjoyable. The album does have quite a good bit of range for them. It goes from like those sappy emotional songs like Guys to sort of the more classic cheesy pop, and then to aggressive punk on the opening song People, which again was probably very polarising from the response I saw. So yes, this album does have very high highs and very low lows, but I think the high highs were enough to bring it into one of my favourite albums this year. It's just when I listen to it now, I'm just going to skip the songs that I wasn't really that much of a fan of, and that leaves a very good album. Number 8 is Wake Up Sunshine by All Time Low. Now this sort of really combined the more recent pop sounds of the band with some of their past pop punk, and it does sort of feel over the past few years the band has been a little bit lost. They've sort of lost their footing and they don't really know quite what they do and where they fit in. So I don't really think now they've got a bit older they can't go too heavy onto the emo side of things. I think that gets a bit cringy when you see middle-aged men singing about these sort of teenage issues and that sort of thing. So I think this album's found a perfect middle ground and it's let them come back into their own. I think it's done very well. They've combined that pop music that's been a lot more recent with the pop punk, creating that sort of mainstream friendly pop rock like the 1975, like 5 Seconds of Summer, that is all very popular right now and deservedly so. So I think this is definitely a step in the right direction for them. It's full of that cheery, youthful pop punk. It's very good fun. It does sound a bit familiar from the first listen and it's just very enjoyable. Number 7 is Amends by Grey Daze. Now if you don't know Grey Daze, because they sort of went a bit under the radar surprisingly to me, they were the former band of Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park. And this album, I guess it sort of is a reissue, but technically not, because these are songs they recorded ages ago but were never really properly released, or they've never really been released digitally at the very least, so a lot of it's been lost to time. So now they've sort of re-recorded it, reproduced it besides Chester's vocals, quite obviously, and they've re-released the music, and it's been professionally done this time compared to the more amateur attempt I guess they did when they were quite young beforehand. And I think purely for the sentimental value, this album was always going to earn a spot on this list for me, because I am a very big Linkin Park fan. They were my favourite band ever, so I was always going to like it, especially with Chester Bennington on this album, and it did not disappoint. I was a bit scared to listen to it because, yeah, he was quite young, he was inexperienced back then, so I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't that amazing, but actually it is quite a good album. It really fits the time it came out in. It's very 90s, this sort of grungy arena rock, and yes, there's sort of a few influences of new metal. You can hear a bit of that Linkin Park sound coming in already with it, but I think definitely at its core it is more sort of classic hard rock and classic grunge rock. Even without the quite unfortunate circumstances that led to this album being released, I think this album is very heavy emotionally already, and I think that's definitely one of the strong points of it, and that emotion is really driven home by Chester Bennington's powerful vocals. Of course, Chester Bennington is always going to be a strong point of any album he's on, and it was again this time. Now, to be fair, I'm not normally a fan of albums that are released posthumously. I think it's the word or songs that are released after the singer or band member has died. Usually, to me, sometimes it seems a bit almost like corporations just trying to cash in on the person who died, but I think this one was done very authentically. It was done in a very respectful way, so I appreciate it, and it's not really in that sort of moral grey area for me, which sometimes this sort of music is. Number 6 for me is Glue by Boston Manor. Now, this certainly was a bit of a change up from the punk rock that the band was known for. There's still a bit of it on this album, but I think they really stepped outside their comfort zone on this album. Now, definitely the essence of that punk spirit is still there throughout the album, but it's certainly delivered in very many different ways now. It's sort of delivered in almost Britpop-like songs and those emotional ballads throughout it. And this album really deals with lots of very challenging, heavy themes, dealing with suicide in particular, toxic masculinity, mental health, and lots of problems with society. And these sort of dark, sombre albums that's all about reflections of society have almost become a bit of a cliche in 2020, to be fair. I think a lot of artists have gone in that direction, understandably, once Corona became a big thing, but I think I'm pretty sure this was released before lockdown in the UK, or if not, it was around that time. So they're certainly one of the first to do it, so I don't think they were cashing in on a cliche. And it's all really powerful lyrics in this album, I think really drive it home and make it so effective. I think this was an album made with a purpose, and it does its purpose perfectly. Number 5, The Halfway Point, and I'm saying for this, More Again Forever by the Cortinas. Now, I think this was the most underrated album that I've got on this list, because it wasn't really that sort of vibrant indie rock that the old fans wanted, and I think this album was made to address the band's criticisms, but I think it came out too late in their career to please the critics, unfortunately. While at the core of this album is still very much is a British indie rock album, I think the Cortinas have really taken a big step out of their quite narrow comfort zone. I think unfortunately for some people it was a bit too much of a step, but I really liked it. You got to see lots of new sides of the band, you got to see them do a lot of new things, and it's quite different and quite contrasts the early days of the band. It also goes a long way for showing that there are new things to be done in British indie rock. A lot of people have been saying it's quite a stale genre, but I think Cortinas on this album shows you can still have a British indie rock core, but you can do new things with it, you can take it in new directions, and it can still be effective. Cortinas are certainly a band known for their charisma, their fun, and their lad-like behaviour, but I think this album certainly shows a more vulnerable and mature side to the band, which is quite different from what we've really seen before. We have seen it a couple of times in the more recent albums, but it's very different to the more like lad-based early days of St. Jude. And yeah, while I'm talking a lot about the music that's gone in a new direction, there's still some songs like The Joy of Missing Out on Previous Parties, which I'm sure are crowd pleasers for the more typical Dark Fruits fan of the band. Although these Dark Fruits indie songs aren't really on the same level as the songs on St. Jude. Number 4 is I Disagree by Poppy, and I think this album is really where she's come into her own. She's released a few different things over the past couple of years which have sort of been a bit all over the place, and to be fair, this album is really all over the place too, but I think here it's really coming together and it's working as most effective. I guess the only real way I can sort of summarise this album, which is quite tricky, sort of this genre-hopping post-metalcore album, and that's sort of the most, I don't know, brief way I can describe it. It's a bit all over the place, and it sort of, I guess, challenges me as a reviewer or critic, even though I've got no qualifications for that, to talk about this album, because it is quite a tricky one to do. This album has a lot of bending of genres and breaking uniformity, and that's something I'm quite a big fan of in my music, as you'll see on my next couple of picks. And I think it's done really perfectly here. There's a very strong contrast between some of the sort of more, she plays into being a bit of a almost Barbie girl like persona in some of the songs, and then she has this raw, aggressive metalcore, like screams and aggression throughout, and it sort of has such a strong and almost unnatural contrast, makes it feel really eerie, and it feels unnatural, it feels like something that shouldn't work, but I think it's done in a way that it does somehow work. This album does really showcase Poppy's real strong talents as a vocalist, especially now she's free of, I think, whatever that asshole was called that she was with before. I think it's Titanian St. Clair, is some dumb name like that. I'm very glad that she's got rid of him and now she's moving on. And quite fortunately, now she's got rid of him, she's doing her best work yet. At the very least for his album, I think it definitely stands out and it defies your expectation. It keeps you on the edge of the seat because you never know quite where it's going to go. And I think this really shows Poppy isn't a YouTuber who does a bit of music as a side project. She's more of a musician that does YouTube as a side project. Number 3. And for me, this is a celebration of endings by Biffy Clyro, and it really is a return to the authentic, wild Scottish rock and roll that the band were known for in their early days. It's really gnarly, it's intentionally rough around the edges, it's meant to be a bit chaotic and wild, it's meant to be something that you can't really pin down, it's something that's intense, aggressive, and just trying to move all over the place. You do get a few moments of calm throughout the album, like in the song Space, which is a really strong point of the album, I thought personally. And they give you a moment to breathe, and you can appreciate the raw talent of this band, especially again in the vocal delivery. There's a really strong, unreserved emotional intensity in the vocals in this album. I think that's really good, and it really is unrelenting, raw rock. And there were a couple of other, I guess, Radio 1 friendly songs on it, like Instant History, which were a bit polarising, and they were a bit of a contrast to the rest of the album. But I like those songs as well. I like the bands combining electronic sounds with their own music. I think it was good. I don't think it comes as naturally to Biffy Clyro as it does to other bands. I enjoyed it, but it was a bit of a contrast to the rest of the album. Number 2. Nothing is True and Everything is Possible by Enter Shikari. Now this effectively is a best-of album for Enter Shikari, but with entirely new songs. This album showcases the best points of every stage of their career. You got a really unrestricted aggression of their early days of punk ravers, as they were called, to sort of the more melodic alt rock and pop rock that you got on The Spark. Again, every song is different and has its own merits. Every song has something good about it, so it's hard to do a summarising statement because every song's unique, so it's a bit unfair to cover them all with one blanket statement. You really got to go through and listen to yourself. It's got a bit of everything, so hopefully there's something that everyone will like when it's got so much variety. But all these different styles and genres, they're all still delivered in that classic, unique Enter Shikari way with their slick lyrics and complicated metaphors. Again, this really pushes genre boundaries, but all of it really makes you want to get up out of your seat. You want to jump up and down, you want to sing along to it, and you want to be in a mosh pit to it, so hopefully we will be in 2021, fingers crossed. And lastly, in number 1 for me, technically not an album, Post-Human Survival Horror by Bring Me The Horizon. Now the band did call this an EP, but by the official chart definitions it's actually an album, so I'm going to go off counting this as an album and giving it my number 1 spot. Now this album really did the impossible. It managed to unite old and new Bring Me The Horizon fans, and that's quite an achievement considering how polarising the fan base can be. Now I'm definitely a little biased because Bring Me The Horizon are my favourite active band, so I think this was probably going to be my number 1 album this year, no matter how good it was. But I think looking at all the reviews, looking at all the reactions, this definitely was a very strong album and lots of people are really enjoying it. Post-Human Survival Horror really pushed the boundaries of what can be done in one album, especially in an album so short. And it really is an amazing, impressive feat of achievement when you consider that it was all basically done over Zoom. For most of the recording, the band members weren't even in the same room. One of the band members wasn't even in the same continent throughout the entire recording, and they still produced one of the best, strongest rock albums this year. Bring Me The Horizon have always been inspired by Linkin Park, but I think here you can most clearly see the Linkin Park and also a bit of Prodigy influences in their music. I think they're definitely influences, it's not to the degree to me that it feels like they've stolen from the band. I've seen a few people say that. I think it's more inspired rather than stolen, but again, that's always up to you. But you see those styles coming in where they combine that electronic core and their rock music so seamlessly together to create maximum energy, maximum intensity and maximum aggression. There's also a host of exceptional collabs on his album that really brought it up to the next level, such as Youngblood and Amy Lee. And saying that now, I've just realised I've completely forgotten Youngblood's album this year while I've been writing and recording all this, but I feel I'm too far in to back out now. So I guess Youngblood's album, Weird, gets an honorary mention. That should have definitely been on my list, and oops, I forgot it. But back to Bring Me the Horizon, I think Post-Human Survival Horror was some of the strongest lyrical work I saw this year, and I think this year has really brought the level of lyrics and strong, meaningful lyrics up to the next level. Because a lot of bands have decided they want to make their music that means something, they want it to have that next level of emotion, connection, all that going on with it, rather than just being a bit of fun to listen to. So I think they've done very well to stand out in an extra challenging year for that. Lots of the lyrics on this album are all about approaching the crises that we're living through in 2020, all from different angles and perspectives and different elements of the crisis. Sometimes these are a bit on the nose for my liking, but sometimes I think a lot of the time it's done very well. And they managed to do all this while delivering some of the most defiantly in-your-face music that I've heard in quite a while. It's built on everything they've done in their career. It's taken all the best bits and they've built that, put it together, and they've taken it up to the next level. So that's my personal top 10 albums of the year. I'll be curious to know what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? You probably do disagree with me because these are pretty highly personal and I don't think it's a problem. We're all entitled to our own opinions on this and I think that's fine. I think it's good we all like our own things. But of course I'm really curious to see what are your personal favourite albums from this year, because they've had a really strong amount released this year. I think lots of artists have been working hard over lockdown when they've got not much else to do. They've been channeling that into their music and I think we as the fans at least get to enjoy the results. So as always, I hope you've enjoyed watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe, the usual stuff, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.